Yeah, I was obviously at the Show Races and the Red Card Awards at the Etihad Stadium in, I think it was April. And it was just such a powerful day and powerful event because there were so many young people there who just had this beautiful view of humanity and equality and people working together. And it didn't matter about their backgrounds and their differences. They were all pulling together to say people are equal and that's how we should be looking at things. So for me being there, you touched on the fact I got a bit emotional. It was big for me because it reminded me so much of when I was growing up and some of the stuff that happened. And at times, people either they didn't understand or they were like, that's not a big deal. But it's huge because you're suffering abuse and pain purely based on what you look like and your heritage. And that is really, really difficult to deal with. And you're at a massive disadvantage because some of it's really blatant and some of it isn't. And it doesn't come down to you or your personality. It was purely, oh, well, my skin color's different. So to be there and see those young people and kind of get that warmth and feeling off them about what they're doing, and then for me to say what I said, and say how much I valued and appreciated the work they'd created and the kind of ideology of what they were talking about, and for them to then come back to me and say, you've inspired us, and that was kind of a beautiful moment. I'll always remember that. It was such an important thing, and it's so nice to be able to feel like I'm not in a hugely privileged position, but I'm in a place where I can kind of make a difference. I've got more chance of people listening to me now than 5 years ago when I wasn't on TV. So if I can talk about some of my experiences and someone can say, oh, that's really helped me out because I've experienced racism and it really upset me and I didn't know how to deal with it. Or there's someone else out there who goes, I didn't realise that if I used this word it was really offensive. Or maybe someone's gone, oh yeah, maybe, mixed race people aren't that bad. Then that can only be a good thing. But I think it's really important for these young people to carry on with the work that they're doing because it's really inspiring and they can help inspire other young people, but also older people who've got ingrained stereotypes they might have had for years. And these young people might change those people's minds, and that's such a powerful tool. Teaching young people about racism and the effects is so important. Education is massive in terms of understanding other people, other cultures. So to be able to get in at a young age, primary school, secondary school, and teach people about diversity is fundamental because, these people in the future are going to be the people who are lawmakers in society. And I think we've got a great opportunity to make a massive difference at a young age so that hopefully in 30, 40, 50 years, we're not having to talk about the same issues that we're having to talk about now and that we've had to talk about in the past. Experiencing any type of racism is really tough. It was hard, as a kid. From when I was in primary school, being abused, basically. People having a go at you for the colour of your skin. So I got called every name under the sun. You think of the most offensive terms that you can think of for black people or mixed race people, or people of ethnicity, everything. My friends got hammered for being friends with me. I got chased down the street in Exeter. I got abused when I played football, on nights out when I was 18. It's upsetting. It's scary at times. And when you're really young, you don't understand it. Some of the first times I got abused at school, I hadn't heard those words before because clearly no one in my family was going to call me the names I was getting called at school. So I didn't know what they were. But you know that it's toxic and it's coming from a really bad place in the way that it's said. It's not like, hey mate, in a really nice way. It was said in a angry, passionate, negative way. And then there are times when people would use those words to describe you. So I'd be playing cricket and they'd say, oh, the is in next. Or you're playing football and someone goes, mark the, and I'm like, well, they're talking about me because I'm the only non-white player in this team. And that's really difficult. And also, when I was growing up, when I went to secondary school in Devon, we had this out of a school of 1,500 people-ish. I think at one time we had maybe one non-white teacher and maybe 10 non-white students. Now, I started secondary school in 98. I did my GCSEs in 2003. And there were loads of times when really, really racist stuff got said. But no one was offended by it, so no one would report it. So the school at times, and it wasn't really their fault, but they'd say, oh, we don't have an issue with racism at our school because here are the figures, and we've had 3 incidents in the last 12 months. It would happen all the time, but no one would report it because no one would either realise that it was offensive or go and say, no, that's inappropriate, we're going to stamp it out. And I'm sure if teachers heard, I would have liked to think that they'd have done something about it, but around students, it would happen loads. Often, I remember 2002 World Cup, someone saying something about Darius Vassell and saying he shouldn't play for England because he's a... And it was like you just said, the sky's blue. No one blinked an eye. No one said anything. And I was like, can you hear what you've just said? And they're like, oh, I don't mean it. And you're like, well, where's that come from and why are you saying it? But that stuff would happen loads. So I think there's times when people say racist stuff that they don't mean, and there are times when people would say it's clearly massively offensive. There are a lot of people who say things and they don't think all black people should be put on a boat and sent back to Africa or whatever. Do you know what I mean? There are some people who say that. They're like, oh, lock them up, get them out of the country, we don't want Muslims here. There are other people who are saying things and it's like, you don't mean that, but you don't realise how offensive what you're saying is. And then there are other instances where people say stuff to me and they don't mean it in an offensive way. Not bad people. They don't think that white people or Christian people are better than black people or Sikhs or whatever. But they say things that are offensive because of a lack of education. It's very easy to go, no, you can't say that. Yes, you can say that, and kind of castigate people and dig people out massively for things that they've said. There are lots of times where someone might say something and they'd be absolutely mortified if they knew that someone was offended by it. Like if someone calls me half-caste, I'm like, nah. But if they're not, if they just think that that's an acceptable term and they don't realise that I might be, I don't want to say offended by it, but that I'm like, I don't want to be described as that, then I think it's so important that we have this discussion. I don't think we should be throwing people under a bus for saying, clearly if you're saying, oh, you know, some of the stuff that happens in football where people are saying the most horrific things and throwing bananas at black players, that's clearly a premeditated thing and they know exactly what they're doing. But if you're talking about people or different ethnicities and you've used a term that you think is okay, and maybe it was 20 years ago and it's not now because things have changed, then I don't think people should get absolutely hammered by that, because otherwise how are people going to learn and how are we going to progress? I think we have to have a discussion where it's open and frank and people can go, oh, I didn't realise that I can't say that. And that's very different from saying, I don't know, black people shouldn't be able to buy houses, or we don't want any black players at our club. That's clearly like massively racist based on premeditated views and whatever. Whereas if you're saying something through a lack of education that isn't deliberate, I'd say that's different. There's probably more media and things about it. You know, I probably hear now more in the media about racism and things that happen. Like in football, you hear about racist events now more, but I'd say it happens less than it did 25, 30 years ago. But there's more awareness about it and people are more willing to discuss it and stand up and say this is wrong and this is why it's wrong, which can only be a positive that it's getting talked about more because it's more out in the open. Now, clearly we've still got a really long way to go because that stuff's still happening. But I remember going to football matches as a kid with my dad, and some of the stuff you'd hear in the stands was horrific. and no one would say anything. It would just happen. And at times, I'd be scared. They'd be saying stuff about players and the team that I support or whatever who were horrific. And now that might be about their sexuality or their religion or the colour of their skin. No one would say anything. Whereas now, I don't hear it as much, but if you do hear it, I think it would be more likely that someone would stand up and go, shut up. Or it would get reported, or something would get done about it, because I don't think it's tolerated as much as it was before. People before could turn a blind eye and just go, I didn't hear it. Whereas I think that happens less now. And the more education we get in schools and for young people, the more in the future people are going to go, no, that's unacceptable. You can't say that. You can't be digging people out about their sexuality or their religion or their race or their ethnicity. And that can only be a good thing. I'd say now I see less examples of me on the receiving end of racism, definitely compared to when I was younger, in terms of being told to go back to my own country or, you know, people saying really offensive stuff to me. That's probably because at times now I'm in a bubble working for the BBC and in and around people who've maybe had more education about what's going on. I'll still experience things where I'm like, oh, there's maybe a reason why that's happened. Like when I go to an airport, pretty much every single time I'll go, I'll get searched or I'll get stopped or, excuse me, sir, can I have a look in your bag? Now, it's kind of a bit of a buzzword at the moment, unconscious bias. I'd say there's a reason why I always get searched. I think it's good because it's not being tolerated and there's awareness around it, there's media around it, there are stories around it. As I said earlier on, I think it probably happens. It used to happen as much, if not more, but people, they either didn't want to know or it didn't get reported or it wasn't as much in the public domain, and it is now. But I think it's so powerful that people like Raheem Sterling can come out and they can talk about their experiences and say, this happens and it's not a one-off and we receive racist abuse all of the time. But now we're getting to a point where people want to hear that, because maybe 20 years ago, people didn't want to hear that, or it was just like, oh, it's just part and parcel, just get on with it. I think we're at a place now where people like Raheem and other black footballers can make a stand and people are going to listen and they're role models and they can make a huge difference in our country and with racism and the culture that shine a light on what's going on. And, you know, you've seen instances in Russia and other places where it's light years away from where we are in England. So it's really tough. I can only imagine what those guys go through when they play in those countries and they suffer the abuse that they suffer, and then really nothing's done about it because a club or a country might get a pathetic fine. But that's down to kind of governing bodies and foundations stamping down on it and actually being serious about it and not just going, here's a token 80 grand fine, which means nothing.